Joining us from his home in Northern California, author Brian Reisinger. He's the author of Land Rich and Cash Poor. And get a little of this, Brian. I have your book here. I'm going to put it on the screen right there. Look at that. It's like
Outstanding.
we're so slick. It's unbelievable. Brian, I have to. Okay, before we even start here, I have to tell you, I did not read your book, but I did read a piece you wrote for Wisconsin Life magazine on the last day of your farm, family farm dairy farming, and I got to be honest, it made me cry. It did.
Oh,
Now I have I'm going to preface this. I have a little bit of my personal interest in your story is that I also grew up in a small town in Minnesota in a farming community. We were not farmers, but I also was expected to take over my family business and didn't. So, so how did that work with your dynamics with your family? How did that work out with you?
yeah. Well, I appreciate you having me. It's good to be with you, and thank you for starting on that personal note. It's always good to hear people who have stories of and understand family businesses and legacies, and it's a special thing. It's something that I wrestled with for a long time. As I grew up, I loved where I was from. I grew up admiring my dad, and I discovered as I got older that I had more talent for words and writing than I did for cattle and crops. And so I wrestled with that for a long time, and I wanted to do what my dad did, but I wasn't sure I'd succeed at it. Wasn't sure
Did
I'd
your
be
family see it that way too? That you had a talent for what you were doing?
Yeah, my dad, I think, saw it earlier than I did. I did my best to do everything I could to please him, but there was one story we tell in the book where we had hay bales going up a conveyor up into the barn, and my job was to push the hay bales off. It was hot, sweaty work up there. We'd done it for generations, and I was up there to push the bales off the conveyor belt. Well, I had taken a book with me to read in between when we had loads of hay. And all of a sudden, we had hay bales getting backed up in the barn, and bales were falling 30 feet above out the barn window. And that's when my dad
Because
told me, yeah,
you
that's
were
when my
you were
dad,
advanced with your book, huh?
yeah, that's right. And that's when my dad told me he knew that I was destined for something else, although that was before I realized it. When I realized that it was a year my dad got sick, and every generation of our family, I'm fourth generation farm family, every generation of our family, there was a time where the eldest son had to step up and do the work of a man. And my dad had a story like that. So my grandpa, mine was my dad got sick and he had some internal bleeding, turned out to be an operation that had to involve dealing with some cancerous cells. And so I was doing his work for a few months alongside of a neighbor who came to help. And that was the year I'm grateful and proud to have had the chance to work and do that and help move the farm forward. But that was the year that both I did that work and I realized that I wouldn't farm going forward. And so at the age of 14, I realized that, and it felt like I'd betrayed my dad. And so getting the chance to write about these things and tell our story honestly, come back full circle, yes, be involved at the farm. As my dad works to pass it along to my sister, I'm involved in the business side. I hop in a tractor and help out. But for me to be able to tell our story was such a meaningful thing because of the way I felt so tortured over that for so many years.
Is your father still with us?
He is. I'm grateful to say he's still farming at the age of 73.
And I got the impression from your piece in Wisconsin Life that basically your sister became the farmer, right?
Yeah, that's right. My sister's been working to take it over. She had a love for animals that started from when she was little on, and it's grown into her working with my dad. I worked on the farm till I was 18, got my first newspaper job, and my sister started working on the farm when she was in early high school and started working with him all the way through and has continued to do that. She's had to hold different jobs at different times because one of the other things we talk about in the book is how the middle class kind of slipped away for a lot of farmers. She makes a good living, but she does it both farming with my dad and she does hair, works in cosmetology. At different points, she's been a mail carrier, bartender, all kinds of things alongside of the supplemental income that comes from a farm. And that size of farm was at one time enough for my mom and dad to have a middle class living and be able to help both of us pay for education after school.
So what do you think's going on here? Is the American government, are we actually trying to force small farmers out of business? Is that what's going on?
As shocking of a notion as that is, I do think that's what's happened at different points throughout our history. There have been times where literally the government's stated policy, whether it's the establishment or the Republican Party or whether it's the Democrats, has been to push farms to get bigger or get out. And there have been all kinds of times throughout our history that did that. One that we really zero in on in the book is during the farm crisis that developed in the late 70s, early 80s. My mom and dad, we tell the story in the book of them surviving a drought the year that they were married. And my mom did still marry my dad. I want to give that spoiler alert. But the reality is that they were facing a drought. The way they got through it was through hard work and banding together with neighbors. If they hadn't done that, they would have had to take out a whole lot of extra debt to get through those years where they couldn't grow the feed they needed for their animals. If they'd gone into the 1980s with that kind of debt, they'd have been wiped out. We had tens of thousands of farms that were wiped out by all kinds of government policies that caused the farm crisis of the 80s, and it's just one of many examples.
Well, how many people are just getting out just because it becomes too damn hard? I don't mean physically hard. I mean even just fighting the system. I
Yeah.
mean, I'm sure.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we have lost 45,000 farms on average for the past century. And most of those have either been, if not bankruptcies and farms going under, farms selling because of basically sales of no choice, which is to say, you can keep going and try to make a living and eventually you're going to be broke, or you
Mhm.
can sell now. And there are so many families that are forced into that. And it's three big things. One is government policy, and we can get into more examples of that. The other is economic crises that we don't understand how they affect our farms, from the Great Depression to COVID and beyond. And third is technology that has moved American agriculture forward, but has also needlessly left so many family farmers behind. So it's those three factors that just hit farms every decade, every year, and make it harder and harder to make a living.
My wife has a cousin who farms in Iowa, and he's an actual he farms corn and soybean. He's not in cattle, but he has 400 acres, and amazingly, now he can run the entire farm with him and one other person. I mean, the technology is amazing. He talks about these giant 24 row combines, and they're run by GPS. And you don't. He says, I do the field once, and then I get in with a book. Like, you'd probably love this. Yeah, and the combine drives itself.
Mhm.
It's
Yeah.
like amazing. So he's making it work. But I'm just another personal story. My accountant, who runs a small firm. She has a handful of employees, but she says that she thinks the government is trying to force small accountants out of business because they change the regulations so quickly that basically no one person can keep up. And so my question is, what do you think of the? I mean, I don't. Is the corporatization of America a good idea?
It's a great question. And I think that the failures of our government fit in with the corporatization. In the farm crisis, the
Oh,
failure
I'm
was,
sorry, I didn't hear that. What did you say?
yeah, the corporatization fits in with the ways that our government is failing us. So the government, during the farm crisis, what they did was they pushed more debt on farmers, government fueled debt on farmers, and then shortly after that, they increased interest rates to control inflation. You can argue for or against either of those choices, but when you make those choices one after the other, what you do is you push debt on farmers and you make it more expensive. That's happening at the same time that our government has really leaned into bigger being better in every single element of our American economy. And so people talk about the big farms, but I always say, well, it's not really about the big farms themselves. What it's about is all across the American economy, we have industries that are largely dominated by a few large players. When you do that, the food industry has to keep up with the rest of the American economy. The agribusiness companies have to keep up with the food industry. The farmers have to keep up with the agribusiness and the food companies. So everybody's keeping up with the Joneses here. And farmers, whether they're big, small, or in between, are all facing that pressure to get bigger and get out. And some of them get bigger, and some of them get out, and then others are struggling along trying to find a third way. And that's really the kinds of family farms that we're talking about in the book.
Brian, how many acres or how many head of cattle do you need to be no longer be a small farm? Like, what are the numbers?
That is such a good question. So in the 80s, when my dad was first paying off the farm to my grandpa, the average size midpoint of a dairy herd, just to use one example, was 80 cows. And we had 50 cows. So we were on the small side of medium at that time.
Uh-huh.
That 80 number is now 1,200. That's the
Oh,
midpoint.
Jesus
Of their,
Christ.
yeah. Yeah. And so farms that were at one time medium are now minute. And so that's the kind of scale that farmers are fighting against, whatever their size. They're all facing that pressure again because of economic crises, because of government policies, and because of the shift in technology that is pushing farms in this direction.
So how are what the current how's the current tariff situation um affecting farms like your families? I
Yeah.
mean,
Yeah. So there is an opportunity to put family farms first in our trade deals and deal with a real dilemma that farmers have been facing. And that is that on the one hand, the wide open trade of the 90s led to a lot of unfair trade practices, things that have led to, even if there are more open markets, unfair practices, lower prices, anti-competitive behavior that's affecting American farmers. And then on the other hand, farmers can't have a shut down trade. They do need to have markets abroad to sell their goods in addition to selling food here to Americans. And so what we can do is we can move forward. You can use tariffs and you can use other tough negotiations to drive harder bargains that wipe out unfair trade standards, but do that while working to open up markets. So what we've been seeing with the UK, Japan, EU, Indonesia, if we can keep opening up markets and if we can have the final negotiation around those deals be focused on putting family farms first, we can both make markets more fair for farmers as well as workers, et cetera, and be opening up markets. But if we just let the doors be wide open, we'll have farmers vulnerable to foreign manipulation. And if we shut them down, we're going to have farmers vulnerable to foreign retaliation, which say they make it harder for farmers to sell their goods in other countries.
Are the Trump negotiations doing that stuff?
It's a good question. There have been a lot of family farms that have been speaking up, and a lot of farm organizations have been speaking up about the need to see trade deals coming out of these harder lines. And so the Trump administration sort of began the process by drawing a harder line. And the farm position, I think, at that point is, okay, if we're drawing that harder line, let's make sure that we're accomplishing deals. And they're starting to see those deals. I think the farming community would like to make sure that the deals are tough, and they'd like to see deals continuing. And I think they're seeing hope here that we're seeing kind of a family farm first approach. And we just need to see how the rest of it plays out in terms of the number of deals that are accomplished and how the final negotiations land. I'll give you an example. The UK could be a huge opportunity for family farmers who raise beef if we can make sure that the final deal allows enough types of American beef in their borders. I think that's the goal and that's the hope. But all these things are complicated and very sensitive.
Yeah, but Brian, have you ever been to the UK? They can't cook, you know.
That's true.
They're gonna take that beef and they're gonna burn it. That's what's gonna happen.
That's right. It's funny you say that though, but it's a funny reason that points to why we need to have as much variance and diversity and freedom in the types of fair trade deals that we're making. So for decades, China has been the biggest trading partner in America. It's always been America's biggest adversary. And they buy up a bunch of American agriculture products and then they dump them to press the price down.
Yeah,
In
right.
addition to foreign currency manipulation and other cheating. And so we've got to draw a hard line with those countries to get them in line and hope that we can strike a good deal with China that makes them trade with us more fairly. But the other thing we need to do is move past China. So in 2022, kind of the waning years, the Biden years, and kind of almost closest you could get to in between the administrations, there were only 20 deals as of 2022 with foreign countries. There are hundreds of countries. So let's find other countries that will negotiate fair, have fair markets for farmers, open those up so we're not as dependent on adversaries like China or countries like the UK that might be, not good cooks or uptight about this standard or that standard.
Yeah, and you said the magic word there, China. So what's the deal? And first of all, you're absolutely right. I mean, they're raking us over the coals on everything for years. What's the deal with them buying up farmland? Like, first of all, do you understand this issue? I don't understand it that well. And secondly, what do you think about it?
Yeah, you are right to ask about it, and it is a complex issue, but I can boil it down to some simple terms. The amount of farmland owned by China is north of 300,000 acres. And the
Oh, I'm
amount,
sorry, say again, what was it?
north of about 300,000 acres.
300,000?
Yep.
Right?
And in general, the amount of land owned by other countries is relatively small. But the real issue, you'll hear people saying it doesn't matter, saying, well, it's a small amount of land. Well, the issue is how fast it's growing. So
Yeah,
we had an increase of 15%, double-digit increase in just 2 years of the amount of land owned by foreign countries. And within that, adversaries like China really pushing. And what that's doing is China's very patient. They spent a long time building up their buying of American agriculture products so that we were selling enough to them that when they stopped buying, they could push the price down. They took the time to build that. So
right,
they're having to do this acre by acre.
right,
And in addition, a lot of the farmland that they're buying is near military installations, and
right.
that's not a coincidence. And so this is a real problem to our food security as well as to our national security.
Yeah, I was just gonna ask you about that. My impression is it's not so much how much land they bought, but the location of it seems to be really crucial.
Yeah,
Now,
that's right.
your farm is near Baraboo, Wisconsin, is that right?
Yeah, Baraboo is the county seat of Sauk County, which is where I grew up and where our farm still is.
And you're still traveling back and forth there?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, I have a little bit of a unique situation. My wife is from Northern California, and my work writing can be done from anywhere. So we moved there, and we live in Sacramento region, which has a lot of great farm country for Wisconsin farm boy who never expect to be in
Yeah.
California. And then I split my time back and forth between there and the family farm in Wisconsin. When I'm in Wisconsin, I live there at the farm with my mom and dad, and I help out on the farm while continuing my work writing and trying to find solutions to these issues.
Yeah. And so the reason your piece in Wisconsin Life made me cry is because you were talking about the last day that you guys milked the cows, and
Yeah,
and you said that when the cows were being sent off into the trailer to be moved away, that it's like they didn't want to go. And
yeah,
I'm such a I deal with animals, and I'm sure that's true. I don't know how animals. Do you know who a guy named Rupert Sheldrake is? You ever heard of him?
yeah,
He's a behavioral scientist in the UK. He wrote a book called, and this is not maybe the exact title, but it's called "How Dogs Know When Their Owners Are Coming Home." And so, everyone has experienced this phenomena about the fact their dogs end up waiting for people by the door. And so he decided he spent an enormous amount of time trying to figure out why this was happening, and he couldn't figure it out. Although he did confirm the fact it's real. And then the other thing you said at the end of the piece is that your dad said you basically had an all-time record day the last day they milked the cows, and
yeah,
he thought it's because the cows knew what was going on. And
yeah.
I don't know. I'm a sentimental fool, but that doesn't surprise me if that was true.
I think you're so right. I think animals and children know more than we give them credit for, and know more a lot of times than the rest of us. I'm 40 years old. I got a little girl who's 1, and she amazes me with the things that she shows me each day. And you have the same thing happen with animals, especially when you work close with them. And
Yeah,
on that last day, as you said, and we talk about this also in the book, Land Rich, Cash Poor, we that day, I remember helping load the cows, and there was the clanging of the trailers, and there's a lot of love for these animals, but it's also a hard day, it's hard work, and it's really sad. And we're pushing them out, and the cows, they were coming out the barn, and they just kept on turning back on us
yeah,
and kept going back to their stanchions. And I do think they knew. And my dad, we talk about this. This isn't in the piece that you read, but it is in the book. He stood there that day, and he did not help load the cows. He stood there and watched because he just couldn't do it. And it's probably the only task on the farm that he has never done.
yeah,
And when they wanted to kept going back, wanting to turn back, it was almost like the cows and my dad were standing in solidarity as we were loading them up, and it
yeah.
was it was really heartbreaking.
And speaking of solidarity, so how many what percentage, and I suppose maybe we have to make a difference between dairy and beef here. What percentage of the total output in America is done by what would be considered classified family farms of the
That's a
total food
Yeah,
output?
that's a really good question. I don't have the latest numbers on the total food output, but I can give you a
Yeah,
direct and
ballpark.
broad
Yeah,
answer. So the number of farms we have in this country, we've lost 70% of our farms at the rate of 45,000 a year. The number of farms we have left, amazingly, is 88% small family farms. 88% of them are small family farms. However, most of our food, the majority of our food comes from the largest of those farms.
yeah,
And here's
right,
why. The reason for that is the way that these small family farms are holding on is what I mentioned earlier. They're no longer making a full-time income off of the farm. It's supplemental income. So you got
uh-huh,
families who are working construction jobs, pulling factory shifts, pouring concrete, any number of other jobs, and farming. And so they're making part-time income on the farm, and they're not able to produce as much food as they could if it could be their full-time vocation. And so the biggest farms are the ones that are full-time and that are churning out most of our food. And the reality is that we could feed our country and then some, and sell more abroad, and have the food be healthier, more affordable, and more secure if we had more of those family farms able to be growing entrepreneurial ventures again, like they were, in the days when my great grandfather first founded our farm in 1912.
well, now I'm pulling this statistic out of my butt. I did not do the research on this, but if I'm right, in the last 100 years, we went from in 100 years ago, 50% of the American public was involved in farming. Now it's like 4%.
Yeah,
And basically, we weren't creating enough food for society till about 70 years ago, roughly. I mean, people take this completely for granted now, but in 1930, most people didn't have enough to eat because literally the world couldn't produce it, you know? So,
yeah.
I mean, I suppose I mean, I'm making a statement here, not a question. I suppose part of the problem is literally technology has increased to the point where it's become I know it's not easy doing what you do, but it's become easier. So to produce for more less people to produce more food, like my cousin being an example. But on the other hand, too, now you guys are in beef now, right?
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah. Right.
I don't want to eat bugs. I don't want to eat bugs, Brian. I
Yeah.
don't. It's bullshit. It's complete bullshit. We can swear on the show. There's no FCC, so, So no, I'm not going to do that. I like my steak,
Uh,
and I want my cows. Here's my deal. Curious to see what your thoughts are on this. Speaking of animals, I don't mind animals. I don't mind animals being killed for food because we're all going to die sooner or later. I just want them treated well while they're alive. You know what I
right.
mean? That's
Absolutely.
that's what I think is. And this thing about the Kobe beef, though, that's getting ridiculous. I don't know if cows need to be massaged. I don't know that, but no. My point is no. I want you guys to produce some beef because I want some beef. I do not want to do. I do not want. I'm not a vegetarian. I'm not. I'm not going to do it.
Well, one of the things that unites people who are carnivores or omnivores and people who are vegetarians is that they want to have a world where you know where your food comes from. And here's the reality. If it was grown in the ground, and I include in that livestock that are fed on things grown in the ground. If it was grown in the ground, it's probably good for you. If it's grown in a lab, it probably isn't. And that's just a maxim that I think we all need to embrace. And you're absolutely right about that being part of the solution. And the problem is that we just have, although there's a growing number of people who care about where their food comes from, we're all divided over these debates rather than people seeing that what we need to do is put family farms first in this country. And if we were to make that change, we could solve a lot of problems, including making sure you get your beef.
Well, is there some sort of union for family farmers? I mean, if 80% of the farmers are family owned, do they consolidate? How does this? I mean, do they have any sort of political
Yeah.
lobby, or how does it work?
Yeah, absolutely. We need to have a world where family farms are getting more and more engaged in the process. It's all the people doing the work, keeping their head down, doing the work. They need to pick their head up and make sure that they're speaking up. And there are a lot of organizations that represent farms. There is a National Farmers Union. There's a National Farmers Organization. There's a Wisconsin Farm Bureau, or excuse me, the American Farm Bureau Federation, which Wisconsin Farm Bureau is the Wisconsin chapter. That's why I thought of it. And all these organizations represent agriculture, and they all do it with members on the ground informing their policies. But the issue is that just so many farm families aren't necessarily involved in the process. So many farm families aren't involved in speaking up. We need more of them to get involved. And right now, with the Trump administration, some of these agriculture organizations do have some influence. They've been able to influence tariff policy and other things so that when America's drawing a tough line, it doesn't hurt a particular type of industry in a way that would be anti-competitive or unfair or leave them too open to foreign retaliation. There's been a lot of dialogue. So the best thing we can do is get family farms more and more engaged in those organizations.
What was your impetus to write the book?
The impetus was just growing up with this issue. So when I was a boy, guys are driving the driver. They talked to my dad. This farm went under. This farm sold. I knew from the beginning that I was very, very lucky and blessed to have been part of something. And I didn't know why it was disappearing, but I knew that it was, even as a little kid. And as I got older and I pursued a writing career off the farm, I wanted to have some sort of purpose that could be worthy of my dad's work. And so I decided I want to answer that question. Why is it that our farms are disappearing? And so I began to investigate that issue. I found the hidden areas of history that are driving that disappearance from the Depression on up through today, and what's the impact that's having. And then we wove that with our family story. And that was really the only way to answer the question, to get your arms around these big forces that have been wiping out farms and tie that to the farms on the ground like ours seemed like the only way to answer that question. So that's what drove me. And what I found, and you're touching on this through all your questions, what I found is that the hollowing out of rural America is affecting every single American dinner table because
Yeah.
as we lose our family farms, our food's getting more expensive, less healthy, less secure.
Right, right. Did you go to school in Baraboo? Was that the
I
nearest town?
nearby, I went to school in a school district called River Valley, which is a bunch of small towns that are dwarfed by Baraboo, which is itself a pretty modest sized community. So I was from small town outskirts, not far from Baraboo.
Yeah, there's something about growing up in small town Midwest America. I don't know. It's hard to explain to people who haven't done it, but there's a certain romance to it. Have you spent much time in the South? I've noticed the same thing going down there. There's
Yeah.
something about it, about that place, and it has a feel of its own. And rural Wisconsin and rural Minnesota do too. It's like it's very hard to explain, but
Yeah,
you know,
you're absolutely right. You're absolutely right. I lived for a number of years in Nashville and traveled around Tennessee for some of my work in both journalism and public policy, and so I got the chance to see rural South as well as the rural Midwest. And there's something about small business, local communities, family that build a lot of work ethic, build a lot of values, and ultimately just are examples a lot of what built this country. Whether it's people who have worked in steel, whether it's people who mine coal, whether it's people who grow our food, whether it's the American cowboy out west, it's people who've had the chance to pursue their own destiny and do it in a way that can help other people and help advance the country, that have really helped build this country. And I really believe that about people like my dad. And I think that as we are losing that, we're not only losing the farms that feed us, but we're losing a part of ourselves a little bit along the way too.
yeah. I have a lot of people on the show talking about this, Brian, and sounds like it's off topic, but it's not. What do you think of this AI thing? Do you think this? I mean, I'm starting to think that. Well, I'm starting to think that AI is going to take over a lot of people's jobs, but at first it's going to be white collar mental jobs. But eventually, I mean, there's already a Chinese company that says they're going to be selling a humanoid robot for $6,500. You
Yeah.
know, I mean, they will basically be slaves, and they will be able to do all sorts of stuff. And I mean, do you think this is going to destroy American culture, or do you have any
It's
thoughts on this?
a great question. It seems like something that is just the classic double-edged sword where there's so many opportunities for advancement and also so many opportunities for it to go wrong.
Yeah,
The best thing that I can do is try to tie it back to that farm issue. I talked about how technology has been leaving farms behind. My hope is that we steer the AI era of technology better than we have past eras of technology. In farming, the reason that so much of our technology moved agriculture forward but left family farms behind along the way is because we lost sight of what's called scale neutral technology. That's where you got technology that is the right size where it can work for farms small and medium as well as large, both in terms of being practical for their operation, but also in terms of being affordable. We used to have more of that in the first half of the 20th century, and we began to lose that. And what it did is it wiped out a lot of farms because they couldn't afford or the technology wouldn't fit a farm of their size. So perfectly competitive, agile, adaptable farms just couldn't take on the next round of technology and they fell behind. With AI, it could go both ways. I'll give you a brief example of each. You can envision a world, right, where we've got large AI implements all being controlled from a bank of kind of NASA style screens. And all you need is one farm employee to run the whole thing for thousands of acres, right? You can
yeah,
envision the world. You can also envision a world that's actually in development uh, where we have what they call small modular vehicles that might be used to treat fields or do other types of field work. And if they're small and modular, you can have a small farmer buy one or two, you can have a larger farmer buy 20. And it's just a matter of everybody can scale up and scale down. And it's technology that can fit everyone's farm and be affordable depending on how big you are. We need AI, desperately need AI to go in that latter direction toward technology that can be used on small and medium as well as large farms. If we don't, AI could be the final death knell on technology wiping out our farms. If we make the change, it could be a way to bring family farms forward into the 20th, 21st century in a way that gives us a brighter future for food for every American.
yeah. Do you think at the end of the day, does it come down to a little too much greed? I mean, the thing is, it's like I keep talking about responsible capitalism. It's like truly a capitalist, absolutely. But on the other hand, you can't do everything for the dollar. I mean, you just can't. People have to. I don't know. Tell
Yeah,
me.
I think you're no, I think you're absolutely right. I think the key is, do we have an ability for entrepreneurship to be able to continue in our industries? And in farming, it has gotten so hard, you're getting pushed toward getting bigger or getting out, that the new entrepreneur opportunity for farms and the ability for a small farm to make it is getting harder and harder. That's not American capitalism, or not the way that it ought to be, and not the way that it was originally. We just need a world where small businesses, the little guys, can have a chance. There's a part of the market that makes sense for them, or they can upset the big guys. I mean, that's the underdog American story. We have to have that ability for things to keep regenerating. And one of the things that I say is that's not only good for the farms that are out there that we want to be able to grow and be part of our system. It's good for other large established companies. I mean, manufacturers that supply to farmers, large food companies that buy from farmers. Like if we keep losing farms at the rate of 45,000 a year going forward, like we did for the last century, we'll have lost the rest of our farms in 40 years. I'm 40
Yeah,
now, but my little girl's my age. We'll have lost the rest of our farms. So that's customers for all of these major corporations. So when I'm talking to people in corporate America, that's what I say is I say, hey, look, at some point, pursuing bigger is better, and that's the only way toward efficiency and productivity, wipes out the customer base for all the rest of these industries. So we need to have a form of capitalism that drives as much money as you can make as sustainably as you can make it. And by sustainable, I'm talking about economic security, the ability for a lot of actors out there. That's
right.
just a way to make sure that everybody can continue forward, including the biggest of companies.
Not to mention the fact if you have I mean, if the whole world devolves into 12 companies in America making food, well, all the food's gonna be the same. It's like,
Well,
that's bullshit.
and it's not good for any one of these companies. I mean, think about like the Great Recession. That's where I cut my teeth in economic journalism. I was covering the Great Recession, the bank failures, and the too big to fail days. I mean, imagine look at what it did when we had banks that were too big to fail to our financial system. Imagine if
Yeah,
that was our food system. And that is a
right,
world that we
right.
could face in 40 years if we don't do something.
Yeah, I thought of that. You're absolutely right. If that I mean, it would've been just catastrophic. We have
Yeah.
so we're drowning in food now, but people can't imagine not having it, but, I mean, that could happen, you know?
If you have only a couple of food providers, from the growth of the food to the processing and distribution, sale of the food, and the trend that we've had continues, you got 3, 4 companies that are doing all of the work to feed our country, and one of those goes down, that's
Yeah.
starvation.
That's right, and well, needless to say, prices go up then
That's
too.
right. That's right.
Terrible.
That's right.
All right, final question here, and this is kind of I think this might be important. Your book in a lot of ways resonates a lot like JD Vance's Hillbilly Elegy, I think. And have you ever thought of running for office?
Oh, well, I appreciate the question. I have thought about it long enough to know that that's not for me. I got the chance to work in the public policy arena and see it up close. And I saw some good people working in government. I saw some not so good people, and it's a brutal process. And I
But
think that we need
you were a speechwriter for a while, right?
yeah, I was a speechwriter and a media strategist for a while on Capitol Hill. And I think we need good people running for office. It's one of the things we need desperately. We also need people out there speaking independently on these issues. And that's why I do that. I try to give nonpartisan analysis, independent analysis on these issues. And I think that's important too. And yeah, I got up close enough to that to know that it wasn't anything I wanted further part of. But I'm glad when good people do decide to run. And I hope that they do. And, it takes all kinds of kinds to keep the conversation going.
Well, it does, Brian, but, the problem is it's like, unfortunately, it seems like anybody of any real accomplishment doesn't wanna do it because it's just incredibly ridiculously messy.
Yeah.
So, I certainly don't blame you at all. I don't, but yeah. Well, let's put your book we'll put your book on our blog too, a link to Amazon right there.
Yeah.
Land Rich, Cash Poor, My Family's Hope and the Untold Story of the Disappearing American Farmer. Brian Reisinger, I really appreciate it. Thanks for joining us.
Well, thanks so much for having me. Anybody who wants to find the book can find it, as you said, on Amazon, anywhere else we buy books online and bookstores nationwide. And our paperback is coming out in September.
Oh,
So
good.
anybody who wants to pre-order paperback instead of hardcover is able to do that too.
And we'll
Also,
put a
oh, go ahead.
you have a website at brianreisinger.com too. We'll
That's
put a
right.
link up to that too. People
That's
have
outstanding.
maybe a little hard time spelling your name, so
Anybody who cares about these issues, just whatever they're doing to spread the word, I can't say how much I appreciate it.
thank you, Brian. I appreciate it too. Thanks for joining us.
Absolutely.